Well, I finally got back to work on the sander, and I got the lower shaft in with the two new bearings, and replaced this grub screw that was missing. I actually, when I was taking this apart, I found the grub screw just laying. I didn't know what it fell out of, and it turns out it probably fell out of this hole. It was really loose. So that's all set. So now I'm going to turn my attention to this top roller. I had actually originally ordered 4 of these bearings only because since I was paying the shipping on them, it was much more economical to just order them at that time, thinking that I would need 2 of these for my other Craftsman sander on the off chance that it uses the same exact size bearing. Now I think I'm going to use those 2 extra bearings to do this top roller. At first I thought this top roller didn't need to be replaced, but it's got a little bit of noise, even though it spins pretty nicely. But the thing is, I'm looking to sell this sander after I finish it, so I think I want to be able to advertise that all 4 bearings have been replaced. They're all 4 bearings are brand new. So I got to take this roller off. This roller is on 2 rods that move up and down to adjust it. And the way it works is when you turn these lower bolts right here, you actually turn these little cams on the back. So where I left off last night was I was getting ready to take this roller off, and I was talking about how this adjustment works on here. So you basically got these 2 rods at each end of the roller. The roller is supported by a shaft that has flat ends that sit in slots on these 2 rods. These 2 rods are locked in position. They're allowed to slide up and down in this part here, unless the screw is locked down. And the way that it's actually a locking nut and then an Allen screw. And then what you do is you loosen this up, and then when you turn, you loosen this lock nut and you turn this little screw, it actually turns this cam-shaped piece right here. And because the center of this disc, the center point of that screw through this disc is off center, this is an eccentric, basically acts like an eccentric screw. And as you turn it, it'll push up on this rod and raise one end, and if you do it to this one, it'll raise the other one. So you can raise this for tensioning the belt, but also you can raise it independently, so you can allow this to tilt, and that's how you adjust the tracking of the belt. But to get this out, what I got to do is I've got to just loosen this screw, and this should slide right out. There we go. Alright, so this end, it's pinned right here. This end, the end of the slot's open, so this actually can just come right out like that. Okay, I can see a snap ring down in here on this side, so you can hear those bearings. So it's funny, when I put the new ones on, they'll be very quiet, but they won't spin as freely as this. New bearings always seem to have that grease packed in them that's kind of congealed, I guess, from not being used. I don't know. Takes a little while for it to work in, I think. Might be able to do that right here on the bench with my arbor press. I got all my arbor presses out here. I was photographing them because got too many of them. I got to sell a few. Which you guys will see in an upcoming episode on an estate sale that I just went to, and ended up getting a whole bunch of stuff. Ended up actually going back a second trip, and I might actually even do a third trip after Memorial Day weekend, depending on how things go. Ooh, cool. So that's not even a sealed bearing in this top here. This part here is actually too big to fit down between these webbed parts on here, so I find myself a little pusher to put in here. Let's see. Find something just right. That bearing is actually kind of a loose fit. not really that hard of a press fit in there, so. So there's the bearing. You can see this is the side that was facing out that could be exposed to the sawdust and everything, and it's actually got a shield on it, but the back side is open. So I guess they're relying on, back side of this one's open too. Well, that one really feels like garbage. So they're relying on no sawdust or anything being able to get in there when these are pushed in there with the backs facing each other. I don't know how well that works. I guess, yeah, theoretically, I guess nothing should be able to get in there. But, yeah, actually all that's in there is grease. So when the bearing got hot, the grease ran out of it. Oh, bummer. I just realized these bearings are smaller. These aren't the same size as the ones in the lower. Alright, see if we can't clean this up enough to get a number off of it. Wow, no numbers on that bearing. How do you like them apples? These bearings, these common bearings, usually the part number has to do with the dimensions in millimeters. So, just for the heck of it, grab my Mitutoyo calipers here, digital calipers, and we'll switch it to millimeters. Yeah, there we go. I don't know if you can see that. 32 millimeters on the dot. So 10 millimeters thickness and 11.98. We can call that 12 millimeters because it's not like this is a bore gauge. I can get to 11.99 if I hold it just right. 32, 12, 10. So the first thing I found was actually as little as $1 a piece, but that was shipping from Hong Kong, and I don't want to wait for the slow boat from China. So I go in and I change my filter settings and I tell it to only look in the USA, and the first thing that comes up is right here, 6201 ZZ radial ball bearing, $1.99 with free shipping. Now that seems like a pretty good deal. Hey everybody, it's been a couple of weeks since I've been able to get to work back to work on the Craftsman sander project, and I've come to a revelation. I've decided that I'm going to kind of bail out of this project, and I don't mean that I'm not going to finish it. I'm going to finish it, but what I mean is I'm going to bail out of the video series, because if I had known how poorly received this video series would have been, I probably never would have even bothered videoing any of it, because it was a complete... It was a lot of waste of time on my part to go through the added effort of videoing it, which slows down the whole work process, and then doing all the editing and everything and uploading, and finding out that the thing, it takes like a week to get 150 views. So as opposed to like some of the other video series, like I did a flea market find series, and it baffled me that how much better that did, and I actually thought that was kind of a boring series personally. But anyways, long story short, of course views might equate to people clicking on it, watching it for, there's all analytics I could look at and everything. I just don't have time for that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to really kind of abbreviate. Instead of showing a lot of what I'm doing, I'm just going to like take time out, take a couple, a few seconds of video, kind of show where I've progressed to and stop. So last we looked at this, I took the bearings off of the top roller here, and I was going to order new bearings, but when I went through my piles of bearings, I found, the luck of the draw, exactly 2 brand new old stock, you can see they're still wrapped up, bearings of the exact correct size. And not only are they of the correct size, but they're nice, made in the USA, new old stock Fafner bearings. So this is a good quality bearing. They feel a little stiff, but that's because the grease inside there hasn't done any work in a while. I'm hoping once they run in and that starts to warm up, that grease will be less coagulated. So technically I'll still be putting new bearings in. It's just that the bottom ones are brand new El Cheapo Asian bearings, and these are new old stock US bearings. but they're going to be an improvement over, these bearings are only shielded on one side, as we talked about already, and these are fully shielded. So I've already pressed on the first new bearing. How did I do that? Well, I got it started with the arbor press. The arbor press was made it a snap to take the bearings off, and I was able to use it to get it started, but then I finished it on the big, on the H press. And I keep all kinds of junk like this in a box over by the press just for such an occasion. These are the perfect size sleeves, it turns out, so that I can push on that inner part of the bearing, the inner race there, or that inner wall, without putting pressure on the outside. In other words, you wouldn't want to press, like say with this sleeve, because then your pressing force is actually exerting an axial force, I think, on the bearing that you shouldn't be putting on the bearing. So enough said about that. When we next see each other, I will probably have this all cleaned up and fully assembled. There's the shaft all cleaned up, lubricated this joint so it swivels better. Alright, there's the roller assembly all cleaned up with all the new bearings installed, the swivel points here lubricated, so I'm going to reinstall that in the machine. I put this back on the mill, and I ended up taking off quite a bit more because I wanted it to clear that bolt that I had a problem with before. For those of you who don't recall or didn't see the earlier videos, there's a bolt that goes right here with a washer that I couldn't remember what that was for, so I just took it out since this was interfering with the bracket, and now I realize that that's actually for the stop. In other words, this is a cast iron stop right here. These are actually pretty rare to find intact. These often go missing completely because these aren't used when the belt sander is used in the vertical orientation, so they often get lost or they break. So that's kind of neat that that one's still there, but that's held on by that bolt right there. So I want to make sure this is fully functional. So I just threw this back on my rotary table, clamped it down, and milled off quite a bit more. Also, I didn't like the finish I had on the edge here that was left by the roughing mill. So on the final pass, I put a regular 4-flute end mill in there, cleaned it up, and then I just deburred the whole thing, all the edges, on my my belt grinder. And I'm now satisfied. I'm going to call that done. And now I've just reassembled it to this point, hopefully for the last time. Now I can put this plate back on, and I've got it oriented in the vertical position. Now you can see that this bolt clears the top of the bracket, and I think what I'll do next is see how that shielding goes on this thing. Alright, so it's clear to me that this plastic shroud goes on like this, and there would be 4 long screws with countersunk heads so that they would flush fit in here that thread into this plate. But it's also clear to me now that the pulley sits behind here, so the next thing I think that's going to have to go on would be the pulley, and I'm missing the pulley, so I've got to see if I've got a pulley that'll fit this. And I don't know what size pulley this should be, and obviously the size of this pulley is going to have an effect on the speed of the sander, but I do know that it can't be too big because it's got to basically sit inside here. So that's going to kind of make my decision pretty easy. Well, really, my decision is probably going to be loosely based on what I can find for extra pulleys I have around here that'll fit. In fact, the one that's on the motor right now almost looks like it would be the perfect size. So I may, if I find that I have one a little bit larger that won't fit in here, I may steal the one off the motor to put on here, and then I may just put the larger one on the motor. That'll make it run a little fast. I don't know if that's going to be a big issue or not. Well, just wonderful. This is the 3rd pulley I've tried, and every one of these pulleys is just a little bit too big. So this apparently this is some kind of a non-standard shaft size. And then this pulley actually came off of the motor that was on the table for the Toolcraft sander that I bought. It was a homemade mock-up, so this isn't like an original pulley or anything to that system. but I figured, oh, maybe this would work. And when I took it off of the shaft on that motor, it had this sleeve. I was like, oh, okay, maybe that's the secret, but no such luck. The shaft on that motor for the Toolcraft stand, I think that motor is, I think that's a HVAC motor. It's got a much smaller shaft on it. This won't even go on here. So this is larger than the shaft on that, but smaller than whatever that standard is that these are. So I don't think I've got a pulley for this thing.